I am here with Emily McGill, the Ivy League witch, to talk about her new tarot deck, which some of you have seen because I was using it at a launch party at the Algonquin and put a bunch of pictures up on the page. Welcome, Emily. Thanks for taking some time to talk with us.
Thank you. I'm so grateful to be here.
Now you have a background in theater. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, thank you for having me, Kathy. I'm so grateful to be here talking with you about the Hirschfeld Broadway Tarot, which is why I keep looking over here, my copy, my very beat up old copy, that I've had only since the summer, but it seems to have gotten quite a loving a loving affection beat up over the last few months. I started as a theater kid the way many people do. I didn't really know you could do anything in the theater besides be on stage or like be stage crew. I went to my undergrad and got my degree in theater. And when I moved to New York, I already knew that I wanted to be on the business side of things,
Mhm.
but I didn't really know what my options were or what was available to me in that respect. I had very little understanding of all of the different roles behind the scenes, from general managers, company managers, producers, advertising, marketing, press teams, accounting, lawyers, right? Like all of the different departments that are outside. That's not even like production managers and there's so many different roles. And so I started interning in a lot of different offices, had some really great opportunities, and ended up getting a job in a Broadway PR office. And I felt very much at home in that setting. I loved doing PR for Broadway shows. I loved the access I had to the talent, to the theaters. When I was working on a show, I could just walk into the building anytime I wanted to. And like, if it was in the middle of the show, I could just like watch part of the show. And it was a very special time for me as a kid who always loved the spiritual and communal components of the theater, the very collaborative sort of nature of it. And so I did that for a while. And in 2014, I was poached by a pretty traditional PR agency to be their in-house Broadway expert.
Ooh.
And I learned quickly that I was not a fan of publicity. I was a fan of the thing I had been publicizing for the last several years. And so I kind of had a bit of a shift in perspective on I don't know what I'm doing. Um, Still started my own PR firm because, that felt like the only thing I knew I could do. And ended up again working in a lot of different PR offices and with a lot of the Broadway PR teams. But ultimately in the pandemic had the opportunity to like really slow down and reconsider what I was doing. And I ended up going back to grad school at Columbia University. They have a program called the Spirituality Mind Body Institute. And SMB was a beautiful opportunity to sort of take all of these different things that I loved and sort of mash them up into psychology, spirituality, gathering, storytelling, like all of the things that I think make theater theater. Um, and, very selfishly, I had started a tarot practice thanks to my first therapist. She introduced me to tarot as something to do during a session when I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, if I was looking for direction or clarity, we would pull a card. And so when I was looking for a daily practice, that's what she suggested to me.
What
Um,
deck did she have you use? What did you use?
we started with the Osho Zen Tarot deck.
Uh-huh.
And when it came to having my own daily practice, I was like, I don't even have a deck. And she said, there's an app for that. And I downloaded the Osho app. And that was
Uh,
really how I started learning the tarot, was through the Osho deck.
that's
Um,
pretty specific. Okay, so you managed to work it into your graduate program.
Yes, I did. So, um, even before grad school, I had had this idea, like I wanted to have a tarot deck as a theater kid that represented my interests and like what I loved. And there wasn't much on the market. There were a few things in like people's individual Etsy's that they were making specifically. And then there was a deck that John Cameron Mitchell of Hedwig and the Angry Inch fame had created, but it was out of print and was also not really what I was looking for. So I
Mhm.
started making my own. And then while I was in grad school, yes, I ended up getting to do my thesis on tarot as an effective tool for self-reflection. And the Hirschfeld Broadway Tarot was well into its life at that point, in the creation process. And so I was able to utilize it as part of my thesis as a representative of the tool that tarot is and that it's available to people.
So let's back up a tiny bit.
Yeah,
Remind people who Al Hirschfeld is.
of course, the Lion King himself. So Mr. Hirschfeld was a caricature artist who actually called himself a caricaturist because he was much more interested in capturing the essence of the characters that were being played on stage than he was anything else. And he drew like thousands of images. His archive is over 10,000 images. Many appeared in the New York Times and the New Yorker and other major media outlets. He did a lot of album covers and film posters and theater posters and like all kinds of things. And there is a Broadway theater named after him, the Al Hirschfeld Theater, which is where Moulin Rouge is currently playing. And there's a lot of his work there on the second floor in the lobby that you can take a look at. He's also represented, I believe, in MoMA and maybe the Met, but he's at the New York Public Library of Performing Arts, up near at Lincoln Center. You can actually see the barber chair that he used to sit in as he drew, because he felt that that was the most comfortable chair that he could find. And so he would sit in a barber's chair, and that chair is up at the New York Public Library.
One of the connections I have to this is as a committee member putting on Marx Fest,
Mhm.
and Catherine Eastman of the foundation kicked our event off with a presentation about him and his friendship with S.J. Perelman and how he created the defining images of the Marxes when they were at MGM. It was utterly, utterly fascinating. And it was from getting to know Catherine
Mhm.
that I found out later about your deck. And I
Yes.
had I'll just throw this in a little personal thing. The day before I had interviewed on my radio show, I had interviewed one of the creators of a food-based tarot, and I had
Uh-huh.
announced, I am complete. I don't need any more decks. And then I had lunch with Catherine the next day, and she told me about this, and I went, dirty word, I have to have this.
Yes, thank
So,
you.
of course.
Yes, and Catherine is such a great example of, look at that, yep. Is such a great example of exactly the type of person that I am excited about bringing this deck to, because she was a Hirschfeld fan, of course, but didn't really have a relationship with the tarot. And I'm told that now she and her husband tend to pull a
Mhm.
tarot card almost every day together, and they've gotten books about tarot and they're curious to learn more. And that is the greatest joy. Like that is the whole point of this tarot deck for me, is let's invite it to people who might not feel like tarot is for them, or there is such a stigma around tarot between social expectations and like how it's been portrayed in the media and pop culture. I mean, even recently, like there was that horror film tarot that is, I don't do scary, so I won't see it, but but there is such a stigma around it. And I really see tarot as a psychological tool, not as a fortune telling or future telling, piece of technology or equipment. I really do see it as this is a mirror that helps us see something that's in our heart or our gut, but it hasn't made it up to our head yet. And so this is another way that we can tap into our subconscious, our unconscious, our collective unconscious, where all of these archetypes and symbolism reside, so that we do have that general understanding of things.
And how did you come up with the idea of, all right, I want my own deck. Oh, I want this guy's art to be on my deck? Because that's a pretty tall, oh, sure, I'll just get one of the most prolific illustrators of the 20th century.
Right? I mean, it's so crazy. I had the idea, there are complications with some of the IP process. You're thinking about 78 cards. and all of the people who hold rights on Broadway shows. So there was that logistical component, but honestly, when you think about who embodies Broadway and like who's got a definitive style that really represents an entire industry and genre, to the point that, yes, they were different artists, but like Sardi's has their caricatures that they do on their walls. And yes, very different artists, very different style, but it's like this man was so prolific, as you said. I mean, 10,000 images in his archive. And he really just completely captures the essence of the theater and the characters in the theater so beautifully. And so it made perfect sense that Mr. Hirschfeld be represented. Plus, the idea of bringing his work to a younger generation and a new audience through a tarot deck was really exciting for me. I don't know, I didn't grow up with Mr. Hirschfeld, but I had an aunt by affection who worked for the Schubert organization.
Wow.
And I got to visit her in her offices above the Schubert Theater when I was probably like 16 years old. And I saw there were several framed Hirschfelds in the hallway outside of her office. And when I saw them, I was like, what are these? And so that was sort of my introduction to him and his work. And then later I learned about having his daughter coming into his life. Once she did, he started sketching her name, Nina, into all of his drawings. And David Leopold, who's the creative director of the Hirschfeld Foundation, once told me that he didn't even realize that he was doing it. Like Mr. Hirschfeld would have to find the Ninas the same way everybody else did to
Oh,
know how many he put in the drawing.
oh, how funny.
So yeah, so there's these like really fun little Easter eggs too. And we were able to put some Easter eggs into the tarot deck, which was really exciting. There are a few cards that represent people who are close to me, or the person themselves are in there. So that was really fun too.
How did you get your relationship with the foundation?
I had a friend, Julie Boardman, who is the founder of the Museum of Broadway, and she was kind enough to introduce me to David. I'd asked another friend about, who we knew that had a connection with the Hirschfeld Foundation, because I would be reaching out coldly to them.
Mhm.
And of course, Julie had just opened the Museum of Broadway with a beautiful Hirschfeld exhibit, where there was a second one of those barber chairs that Mr. Hirschfeld, was like his spare that he didn't sit in. So you got to like sit in the chair and you could make a Hirschfeld of yourself with like different components in an app. It was so fun. And so she actually introduced me to David. And I sent the information about my idea for this tarot deck, and he thought it was nuts. But
Mm.
he kindly gave me a meeting, and I was able to convince him in that meeting. So we had a great time. Once we decided to move forward on it, we would meet at the Algonquin Hotel, and we basically had what we would call casting sessions. And we would sit at a table, and I would tell David what a specific card tended to mean. I also got him a tarot, like not textbook, but like basically textbook, just to give him easy reference for himself.
Mm.
And we would say these are the essence of the card, and he would say, oh, that sounds like this show or this character. And so we would start furiously searching through the Hirschfeld archive to see which images, because oftentimes when shows were revived again or had been running for a little while, there were multiple images that Mr. Hirschfeld had drawn for the production. And so we were able to see, is it the original production of My Fair Lady? Oh no, actually that like revival from the 1970s is a better image for what we're trying to evoke. So let's use that one instead. So that was part of our process too, which was really fun.
So every card has a different performer on it, a different character.
In character, yes. Or some of them are individuals, legends in the theater industry. We have as the hanged person, Bob Fosse, who, I often think about that card as having meaning a shift in perspective and practicing patience. And while he might not have been known as a very patient director choreographer, his work is certainly patient. The way he used pauses and space and,
Mm.
all of the things in his work. And he certainly had a very different perspective on performance and theater and dance than anybody else ever has. So that felt appropriate. Another one is Eva Le Gallienne, who is the mother of off-Broadway and of repertory theater in the States. We wouldn't really have that if it weren't for her for creating her civic repertory theater back in the 20s and 30s. And so she's the Empress because she is the mother of off-Broadway. I thought, what more perfect person to be the mother of the tarot? So we've got a few like that, but yes, the most part, they are characters from shows, and sometimes it's a Broadway celebrity or it's the person who originated the role, and other times it was a replacement because Mr. Hirschfeld would do what were called Friday drawings, which appeared in the arts and leisure section on Fridays. And so those were usually solo characters, whether it was a replacement for a cast member or something like that. So there are several of those in there as well.
And I catch at least one film star. My favorite card of the deck is the Nine of Swords. I think it's hysterical. It's Gloria Swanson in Sunset Boulevard, ready for her close-up. Okay, that's just it. All right.
I have to double check because I thought it was Glenn Close.
Maybe it's Glenn Close. Maybe
yeah,
it is.
It's Glenn Close as Norma Desmond.
Nonetheless.
Yes,
Nonetheless,
we do, but we do have him in there. We do have the lovers are Maria and Tony from West Side Story, and we used the film version of West Side Story because the image was so evocative of the lovers choosing one another in that moment. And so that was that one. But yeah, that Nine of Swords keeps popping up. It has been quite prolific. We had it, of course, when we did our press event at the Algonquin to introduce the tarot to the media. I pulled two cards, and the first card was the Ace of Wands, which is George M. Cohen from George M. Like that striking the match, being full of passion and drive and creativity and like always starting something new. George M. again, so prolific. And then the Nine of Swords as our second card. Yes, Norma Desmond from Sunset Boulevard, which had opened the night before our event. And then actually a friend of mine hosted a party a week later, and the exact same two cards were pulled from the deck in the exact same positions. And I could not believe that happened. And I was curious about the mathematical odds, and someone looked it up. They were 1 in 36 million. That we pull the Ace of Wands and the Nine of Swords again. But
that's impressive. Well, you mentioned these events. You've had astonishing launch events. I mean, I've never seen a deck, or it's like on par with a really, really successful book. You've been all over the place. There was a comedy club, an evening in a comedy club.
Yes, we did Stand Up New York downstairs at Bond 45 in Times Square, which was really cool. We talked a little about tarot and theater and how they intersect, because that's really, there's, like I said earlier, there's so many archetypes that we see in the tarot deck that are reflected in the theater. And oftentimes one of my favorite ways to explain it is that if I'm talking about someone who knows what their intuition looks like, feels like, how they experience it, has a really strong belief system or inner compass, is willing to do what they believe is right alongside that system that they've built, and is able to, stand in whatever the results or consequences of that might be. I'm talking about the High Priestess in the tarot, but I'm also talking about Elphaba from Wicked. So we see these, in so many different shows, so many, the Fool in the tarot takes the hero's journey. And so that's the person that's like off to see the wizard, or, and away we go. And an early casting for that, I was convinced it was going to be Pippin from Pippin. It was just, that was exactly who that card was supposed to be in my brain. And I was like dedicated to it. And when we looked at the image that Mr. Hirschfeld had drawn of Pippin, the character of Pippin was on his knees.
No, that's not the Fool.
Exactly. That doesn't evoke any kind of journey at all, right? That's much more pausing or reflecting. And so we had to scratch the casting. And we were going to go with Dorothy from either The Wiz or The Wizard of Oz. And then I found the Candide image that Mr. Hirschfeld had drawn. And this was from a late 90s revival of Candide, I think. And the character is holding the knapsack that's like the stick with a kerchief tied around it that we see the fool holding, of course, in Pamela Coleman Smith's Rider-Waite Smith tarot drawings. And I was like, well, I mean, that just told me what the casting was. Like, that wasn't my choice. And in some ways, I feel like I've been a channel for Mr. Hirschfeld's work. You know, like I was saying earlier, bringing it to a new and a younger generation. And at the same time, I feel like Mr. Hirschfeld was a channel because he taught himself how to draw in his pocket so that he wouldn't disturb the theater goers around him. And he started by like doing it on the subway or doing it in the dark or doing it with his eyes closed until he could do it in a dark theater. And it wasn't, you know, a full drawing, but it was enough of a sketch to give him the essence of where he wanted to go with it. And so
Mhm.
I feel like a person who works like that is a channel. You know, they're really like just channeling something. And in many ways, I feel like I've been very fortunate to be a channel for Mr. Hirschfeld's work to continue.
That's so cool. I really, really like it. Would you pull two cards? Can we do a two-card pull
Yeah,
for whoever
yeah.
is watching?
Pile for the folks that are watching.
So you have to choose pile one. You like card one, card two. Choose in advance, right?
Feel into it. What's your number? There's no right or wrong. Some people like both.
And this will go for people who are watching the replay.
Absolutely. All right. So let's see. Who are our card number one folks? Card number one. Yep. Okay. And this is our card number two. And so for our card number one, we have the Strength card. And so, of course, our tarot has their two parts, the Major Arcana and the Minor Arcana. Our Major Arcana being our magic cards, like this one. So when they show up, we pay special attention, corresponding to that hero's journey that we were talking about. And the Strength card in this deck is Luis Alberto Molina from Kiss of the Spider Woman, because this is a character who really goes through some major stuff and uses his inner strength to get him through this terrible experience he's having, where he is imprisoned for who he is because of who he loves. You know, as a gay man in, I want to say it's Argentina, but I could be wrong. Chile.
It
I
is
don't
South America. I'm not sure
South
where.
America, but I don't recall the location of the film, um, or the play or musical or any of it. But you know, we see that he's here dancing with Aurora, who's of course Chita Rivera, you know, and escaping into the fantasy world that he needs to escape into in order to survive the circumstances of his life. And so he really taps into his inner strength the best that he can. And so I'm excited about whoever picked number one and the inner strength. You know, I think there are a lot of people feeling a lot of big emotions this week as we've come out of this election week. And, you know, there's going to be a lot of work that everyone has to do moving forward. And so I think that this is just a reminder to call on that strength that you already have within you and tap into it for whatever you need to do going ahead.
All right. And card number two, which is, of course,
All
what I.
right. For our number twos, we have the Six of Cups. And of course, our cups, right? Our minor arcana are our four suits and our four elements. So our cups are our water, our feelings, our emotions, our intuition, our relationships. And that six, I always think about being a very childlike, playful, and platonic card. You know, there's the give and take, there's the sharing, but it's really a youthful, playful, curious, and creative relationship that we're looking at with this card.
And the image on the card is?
Yes, this image is Wanda from Beehive. So Beehive is a musical review that features a lot of tunes from the 1960s. Um, you know, really just like fun and upbeat and that sort of like, it's not nursery rhymes, but it sort of feels like kids playing on the playground a little bit. And so we've got Wanda singing her tunes from Beehive from the 1960s.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So is there anything else you want people to know? Where can they find you? Where can they find your deck?
Yeah, you can find the deck anywhere books are sold. It's online on Amazon. It's also at the Museum of Broadway and the Drama Bookshop. Um, the deck, we do readings on Instagram, so feel free to follow us at the Hirschfeld Broadway Tarot on Instagram. Instagram's kind of the only social media I tend to use, but you can definitely find us there. And we do bring events to groups and communities and different places. So if that's something you're interested in, check us out. You can email us at magic@emilymcgillentertainment.com. We'd love to see about bringing the tarot to you.
That's a great email address. Wow. Okay. Well, thank you very, very much. I appreciate your taking the time. I wish you incredible success with this.
Thank you so much, Kathy. I love talking to you. This was great.
Great. Bye, everyone.
Have a good day.